Tomorrow is International Holocaust Remembrance Day, a solemn moment when the world pauses to remember the 6 million Jews and others murdered in the Holocaust. Today, we also honor Holocaust survivors and recall the moment 79 years ago when those imprisoned by the Nazis at Auschwitz-Birkenau were liberated. I'm Daniel Greene, a historian at the museum. I'm so honored today to be joined by Tova Friedman, one of the youngest survivors of Auschwitz. Tova was 6 years old in January 1945 when Soviet soldiers arrived, freeing the remaining prisoners in Auschwitz. She had lived most of her life in danger solely because she was Jewish. Tova, thank you for being here today and sharing your story.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Let's begin with this iconic footage from Auschwitz that we also saw at the start of our program. You were one of those children who was liberated on January 27th. Tell us why you refer to that date now as a second birthday.
Well, had the Russians come a week or two later, I wouldn't have been here any longer. I would have been gassed, like 1.5 million children. And they arrived sort of just in time so that certain children were saved because they just didn't have enough time to gas us. And I always think of that day as my birthday, my second birthday. My first is September 7th, and this one is January 27th.
And that first one, September 7th, is in 1938, which is just a year before the Germans invaded your native country of Poland. So you were one when that happened. Your earliest memories are from a couple years later when your family shared an apartment in a Jewish ghetto in Tomaszów Mazowiecki in central Poland. We have a photo here of your father, Michael, from before the war, and of your mother, Reisel. We're seeing her after the war. You've said that you lost your innocence while you were living in that ghetto. Tell us what you saw and heard in the ghetto.
Sorry, I thought I shut it. Okay.
Tell us about, Tova, tell us about what you saw and what you heard in the ghetto.
Well, I saw the ghetto with the eyes of a 3-year-old, 2 and 3-year-old. Most of the time, I was under the table because I was scared and there was no space. It was extremely, extremely crowded. What I remember is the hunger and the fear of the Germans walking into our house and just taking me as a child. They did take my grandmother and they killed her because they were after the elderly and children, both. So I remember the ghetto very, very well because I was there till I was almost 5 years old.
And you were there, who were you there with? You were there with your parents?
Yes, I was there with my mother and my father. In the beginning, we were still as a family. So we afterwards, we were separated. So I remember the ghettos so vividly with the shootings. And of course, my grandmother and my favorite Uncle James was killed. When I knew that people came and didn't come again, I knew even as a child that they were killed. Killing, disease, and unbelievable hunger was part of my ghetto experience.
So then in late 1943, Tova's family was transferred to the Starachowice labor camp, where there was a munitions factory. Her parents became enslaved laborers, and that may have actually afforded them a measure of protection because workers were needed for Germany's war machine. But Tova, you were still in danger, and your mother was trying to protect you. Can you tell us about the rules that your mother laid down for you to try to keep you safe while you were in that labor camp?
Well, till then, in the ghetto, we were together, so that my mother and my father were around and they were sort of protecting me. But here, my parents were gone a whole day and I was on my own. and I was 5.5. And they were constant police and soldiers and dogs watching us. And the children just roamed the streets on their own until their parents came home. So she taught me never to run when I see a soldier with his dog, because she said the dogs are trained to kill you if you run. So so she taught me to stand very still, to have no eye contact, to try to be invisible, not so I shouldn't be noticed, because she said you're on your own, and if you misbehave in any way, you'll be shot. And I learned the rules. I stood very still, no matter how frightening it was when this soldier came by me with his dog. I did not move. And she told me to take off whatever I wore on my hair as respect, keep my two hands in the back to show complete and utter obedience. And I did it. And I learned how to do it.
It's remarkable, Tova. I want to pause here to welcome people who are joining us from Kansas City, Missouri, from Boston, from Philadelphia, from Rockport, Maine, and from Neptune Beach, Florida. Thank you to all of you for tuning in wherever you are. Tova, you were still so young at this point, and it sounds like your mother was being very blunt with you. Do you think that her bluntness contributed to your survival, to saving you?
Well, she felt that the truth will protect me. She was afraid that if she will not, if I will not see reality, what it is, I won't be able to take care of myself. And she knew that one day we'll be separated. And we were in Auschwitz. Till then, she still came home and my father came home, but I was on my own. So she, when there was a shooting, because somebody did not obey the rules of giving the Gestapo the right of way, she took me there to show me. She showed me the life as it was, because her idea was, I have to know, and I have to be careful, and I have to make sure that I survive. It was my responsibility, not only hers, to help me survive. And she was right.
So one of our listeners, Rosa, is asking, what did your parents say to you to explain the situation and to help you to cope?
You mean during the war?
We're still talking about the labor camp.
They just told me, this is the way it is. You don't cry out loud if you're scared. If you're hiding, there was a place in Starhowitz when the children's selection came. Mm-hmm. So she hid me my father and my mother hid me in a crawl space. And I knew that I could not make a sound, no matter what I saw, because making any sounds, I may give away my hiding place. And then when I had to be alone in the room, because I could be not seen anymore, because there was supposed to be no children left, I knew what it meant to be silent. I obeyed the rules.
So you mentioned a children's selection. I want to make sure that people understand, in this labor camp, the Nazis would periodically select people who would be deported, in this case, often to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And you managed to avoid being caught during a specific roundup of children in this labor camp. Can you tell us about that experience when multiple children were rounded up, and what happened to many of your friends from the labor camp Starhowitz?
Yeah, most when we knew when the selection was coming, we got somebody must have gotten a notice. My father that day did not go to work, and I remember he said to my mother, "Hide her." Those are his words, "Hide her." So there was like a crawl space in our little room where we slept, and he helped me and my mother get in there, and then he closed the entrance so that it shouldn't be visible. He hung up some clothes there so the cutout would not be visible. And from that window, it was a tiny window there, I saw all the children going on a truck, and the parents screaming, and It was a terrible, terrible scene that I and my mother never talked about it because it was so utterly, it was so unbelievable and painful. And my mother put her hand on my mouth, but I wouldn't have made a sound anyhow. I understood silence. I understood what it meant not to give away that space. And that's how I survived that selection, that I would not have made it. Even I would have been killed before Auschwitz even, which most of the children were.
Right. The camp itself was where you were, the labor camp was closing, and the Germans didn't have a need for Jewish children. But after that day of the roundup, you began to believe that you might be the last Jewish child in the world.
Well, that's, I didn't know much about the world. I didn't know about other camps. I didn't know about other children. I saw my friends going to their deaths, and I thought, oh, I'm the only child left alive. And I was surprised later on that I saw children in Auschwitz, Jewish children. But yes, I really felt sort of a need to stay alive because I was the last person in my mind.
So Tova's parents kept her in hiding until one day in July 1944, when they were forced to bring her out of the shadows because everyone left and the labor camp was being deported to Auschwitz. Auschwitz was a dehumanizing and brutal place where more than 1 million Jews were killed. It was the largest camp established by the Germans, and the complex included a death camp, concentration camp, and a forced labor camp. Hundreds of thousands of Jews who arrived at Auschwitz were immediately sent to the gas chambers to be murdered. It was the only camp where prisoners who were registered received tattoos. Tova, can you tell us about a moment of human connection that you shared with the young woman who tattooed your arm when you arrived at Auschwitz?
Well, I was tattooed after I was taken away from my mother, not before that. Before that, I had my hair cut, shaved and so forth. But when I arrived to the children's barrack, and this young woman, she must have been 18, she was Jewish. That was her job. And when she tattooed me, I remember her handshaking. And I said to myself, this woman doesn't like to do what she's doing. She was tattooing about 60, 70 children. I was 5.5, almost 6. There were children who were much younger, and some of them at 10, 11, and so forth. And I remember she said to me, now memorize this number, because your name, don't forget your name. What is your name? She said. I told her, she said, no, that's it. Say the number. But I couldn't read the number because I couldn't read. So she gave me like a mantra. She said the words, and I memorized what she said to me, because I knew that when there's roll call and they're calling the number, I better identify myself or the whole barrack will be punished. So I learned. And then she gave me a rag, and she said, put it in cold water and press it very hard so it shouldn't swell. She was kind, I remember her as a young woman that cared. And then she was killed as soon as she finished tattooing all of us. She just disappeared.
So you made this human connection in a place where the Nazis were really trying to take away your humanity.
Right.
Yeah. Tova, we have people joining us from around the world as well. I want to welcome listeners who have joined us to hear Tova's story from Malta, from Canada, from England, from Scotland, and from Germany. Thank you for joining us from all of those places. Tova mentioned a roll call. Prisoners at Auschwitz were forced to stand in line to be counted. This could take hours, especially if a prisoner could not be accounted for by the Nazis. Tell us, I want to remind everyone that you were 5 years old at this time at Auschwitz. Tell us what happened one day when you were fidgeting during a roll call.
That's before I was tattooed. That was when I was first with my mother, because after tattooing, children didn't have to stand outside. But before that, I stood for hours and hours. And one day, we were in the front. I and my mom. I sort of fidgeted, and I felt a hand right on my chest. It was a woman who, an SS, a policewoman, got me out of the out of the line, and she said, "You have to learn to stand still." And she started hitting me. And I remember my mother's words: become invisible. Just don't react. The more you react, the more they're going to be happy. That's what I heard. Other prisoners were talking about it. If you're being tortured, don't react. They enjoy torturing you. So I remember looking up, and she was hitting me and hitting me. My cheeks were swell, and I was just thinking, you can kill me. You will never know how much you hurt me. She got tired, and she pushed me back in line. And her hand was red, but my cheeks were just burning. But I didn't cry. I cried afterwards, but silently after she left. Took me a whole day to stop the inner heaving, inner crying, but never out loud.
It's just amazing, Tova, to think that you had that kind of strength at that age, and I don't know if you call it awareness.
Well, I have to credit my mother to that. She explained it to me. She said it to me. She showed me the smoke, and she said, "You see, that's the burning bodies." She didn't protect me from anything, and I think that saved my life. I think I think it did, and maybe also my psychological life.
So while in Auschwitz, Tova got very sick. She was transferred to the infirmary where she recovered, fortunately. But afterwards, after being in the infirmary, Tova was not permitted to return to her mother and instead was taken into a children's barracks. In January of 1945, with the Soviet troops approaching Auschwitz-Birkenau, the Germans began to evacuate the camp. In the chaos, your mother found you. Tell us about the extraordinary plan that she came up with to try to save you during this moment of chaos as the Soviets were approaching.
I mean, that was just amazing. She walked into my children's barrack. I have not seen her for such a long time. I hardly recognized her. She looked really ill and didn't look like the mother I remembered. And this is what she said to me: they are forcing at gunpoint to walk on foot to Germany. And she said, it's very, very far. She said, very far. And it's snow outside. And look at my feet. I looked down, and her feet were swollen. And she said, look, I'm going to die on this trip. I know that. By the way, this walk is later on named as the Death March. 95% of the people died or were shot if they didn't walk fast enough. And she said, you may survive. And then she said these words. She said to me, I don't want you to survive by yourself in this world. This is not a world for children. Will you die with me here in Auschwitz? We'll try to hide. And with that, she took me out of the barrack, and she found, I didn't even know about the plan, an infirmary where she walked around and she found a body that she said, oh, the woman just died. She's still warm. So she said, climb in. And I didn't ask her any questions. Why? I knew exactly what was going on. And she manipulated my body in such a way so that I should not be seen. And she covered me while the head and shoulder of the dead woman were out of the blanket. And she said, try not to breathe into the ceiling, into the floor, because she didn't want the blanket to move. And I got it. And she said, nobody will uncover you. Don't you get uncovered no matter what you hear. And she disappeared. And I listened. And
It's amazing to think about going to that length to hide among the dead bodies. But again, your mother's instructions saved you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then I could hear steps, and I knew that the boots. You really recognize the boots, and they came, and the man, the soldier, the guard, was examining the dead body, making sure it's dead, because if it wasn't, he would shoot it. But they walked, and I kept my breath. I just held my breath, and the person walked on, and then there was smoke. And there was a challenge because she told me not to get uncovered, and I couldn't breathe. And when I thought that I will not be able to contain, I would start coughing, she uncovered me. She said those words, "They are gone." All the Germans had left because the Allies were so close by, with 50,000 people forcing them to march. When I said most of them died on the road.
So Tova, we have some comments from listeners that I want to share with you. Janet says, that was so brave. If her mother started out with her little girl, they both wouldn't have made it. It started out on that death march. She would have tried to keep up by carrying her when she could not go on, and they would have been shot. As you said, there were so many people who died on the death march. Susan says, what is truly pathetic is hearing people denying the Holocaust. Lives were taken needlessly. This poor child was the same age as my youngest granddaughter. We have a group of 8th graders from Rockport, Massachusetts, who are watching, and they're asking what the years following the war were like. The end of the war must have been a huge relief, but when you and your mother returned home, it became clear that the defeat of the Nazis did not mean the end of anti-Semitism. We're curious to hear how your Polish neighbors reacted to your return, and to answer that question from those 8th graders from Rockport who want to know what life was like immediately after the war.
Unfortunately, we returned to nothing. My mother lost 150 family members. Nobody from her family came back. She was the sole survivor. My father's 3 sisters returned from Auschwitz, and one of them was shot by one of the Polish anti-Semitic gangs. Life was very, very tough for us. My father luckily came back, but our Polish neighbors were very resentful that we returned. And one of them said to my mother in Polish, I heard it. I'm not sure I understood Polish by then, but my mother said to me what she said. She said, what are you doing here? I thought Hitler killed you all. This was our reception. It was a very, and when I tried to go to school, 1st grade by then, because I was 6.5, they called me dirty Jew and threw rocks at me, and I refused to go to school. And I did all the time I was in Poland, I didn't go to school.
So the end of the Holocaust doesn't bring the end of anti-Semitism. We see violence against Jews in Poland immediately after the war, as well as a pogrom in 1946, in the year after the war ended in Poland. So we don't see that the end of Nazism brings the end of anti-Semitism, unfortunately. Right. Tova, I'm sorry that we don't have enough time to discuss more of your experiences after the war, but you immigrated to the United States, you married, you lived for a decade in Israel, you became a social worker, and you have 4 children and 8 grandchildren now. Family is clearly very important to you. Can you tell us about a meaningful trip that you took with some of your grandchildren to return to Auschwitz?
Yes, my daughter Taya and my 4 grandchildren. Here they are, Eitan. They're 2 sets of twins, which is another interesting thing, because twins were killed in Auschwitz. 2 sets of twins, Ari, Eitan, Noah, and Aaron. And they're standing by the candle car, which is exactly the way it was. Yes, I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to understand it. And one of my grandchildren, Aaron Goodman, did a lot of understand. He's fabulous. He understood it, and he put me on TikTok, and he's teaching a lot of non-Jews and Jews about the Holocaust. I'm very grateful to my family, to my children, to my husband. It was a healing process.
I want to get to Tova Talk, your TikTok channel, but I also want our visitors to be able to see a very significant moment that you shared with your grandchildren on this trip to Auschwitz. So we're gonna take a look at that video now.
You are what Hitler could not kill. Really. You're the best gift that I could have, you and my other grandchildren, because I wasn't supposed to be here. Your mom wasn't supposed to be here. Nobody was supposed to be here. We were all supposed to be only in pictures. I didn't even know there were any pictures of me as a child. I just disappeared. It's because of you, and you have a responsibility. You really do. Okay? It's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. So Tova, one of our listeners, Carly, says, your silence saved you during the Holocaust, but your voice is what will save us now. Thank you for sharing this. Mary Beth asks the question, Tova, how has your faith been impacted by your Holocaust experience?
I struggle with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think most people who have a trauma and death and whatever happens to one's life, I struggle with it. I ask the question, where was God? And then some rabbis will say God is not responsible because he gave us free will. And it's the human beings that are responsible. Depends on the day. Sometimes I believe in that answer and sometimes I don't. So I have a daily struggle, but I did a lot of studying about Judaism because I was trying to figure out what was this, because I didn't know what being Jewish meant as a child. And since then, I'm very involved in the religion, but God always has been a difficult issue with me. And I think with many Holocaust survivors, and the question, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, like, why was I saved? What happened to the 1.5 million children? These questions are with me till I die.
So Tova, you mentioned the work that you've been doing with your grandson, Aaron, after this trip to Auschwitz. Aaron was inspired to share your story on social media. So tell us how he's doing that. Tell us about the TikTok channel that Aaron has set up, which we're seeing here.
Well, it was very, very casual. It still is. It was in his house. We were having Friday night dinner, and then he said, "Oh, you have 2 minutes? Sure. I'll just video something for 2 minutes." And I never heard of TikTok, by the way. I'm not a media person. And that's it. And within a few hours, I think, he said to me, "Oh, somebody is asking questions." I didn't even know that people can ask questions from the little video that he made. And within a very short time, he became thousands of people and they asked all kinds of questions. And he asked me if I'm willing to answer. And I was absolutely willing to answer. And we're willing to speak to anybody who wants to listen, any place. I was just in Thailand. I even went to Africa, Nairobi. I'm grateful, and I'm grateful to this program, to the museum that helps us remember those that aren't here. The 6 million, the 1.5 million children. And maybe, I don't know, maybe somebody listening will have enough political clout to help fight terrible anti-Semitism and hatred in general. I don't know.
Well, Tova, you're grateful to us, but we're grateful to you for telling your story to so many people, especially to young people. We have today with us students from Alexandria City High School and students in the Holocaust and Genocide course from Cary High School in Cary, North Carolina. So you're reaching young people right now, Tova. I want to go back to that moment where you thought that you might have been the last Jewish child living under Nazism, to later in your life discovering that you're really part of an extended family of child survivors. I want to share a scene with people today from an extraordinary reunion that you had back in 2017. Let's look at that, and then I want to hear what that was like for you, Tova.
It's one of the haunting images of the Holocaust, children freed from Auschwitz. This week they reunited.
Look, I've had this picture for years, and I've always wondered, where are the other people?
Oh my goodness, that's me.
Yeah, that's you.
And that's me.
72 years after they were last together.
I just
No,
want to
no.
hug you guys. Can we
just-
can we hug?
Oh,
It's such a long time.
it's really very touching every time I look at it. And
What was it like to be with those other people who had survived as children?
it was magic. It was like serendipity. I mean, here it is. And we live in New Jersey, maybe an hour from each other. And the woman, Sarah, was the teacher of my grandchildren. And I had no idea. I knew her, but I didn't know she was a little girl standing next to me.
Wow.
Until this whole thing came out, until the movie, until I didn't know any of this. It was a fabulous, fabulous, wonderful, wonderful experience. And Michael, it's talking everywhere, and it's just I see him and his daughter Debbie. We keep in touch. It's like only we get it. It's all the stories I tell you. It's just the surface. It's very hard to really explain. It's the truth is too unbelievable.
So Tova, Marcy, who's listening, says, I've always imagined the Holocaust from the perspective of a mother or teenager or adult, but I never stopped to think about how a child would have lived and gone through that. Just heartbreaking. And Barbara says, how does one maintain their humanity after such tragic losses and continue living? So thankful Tova survived and is willing to share, especially with the rise of anti-Semitism today. Tova, as we close today, I was hoping you might share something you've said that I found particularly poignant. This is going back to the tattoo. You've described your tattoo as something that empowers you and reminds you of your obligation to share your Holocaust experience with others. Tell us again why that's so meaningful for you.
Well, everybody relates differently to their part of their body and the tattoo. I know people who took it off because they didn't want to remember. When I was 12, a doctor in this country, in America, said he'll give me a gift. He'll take it off, and I won't even remember, won't even have a scar. And I said, no, this is my witness. I feel that I did nothing wrong, and I want the world to see it. And I've been very open with it, to showing it to high schools, to children, to anybody who wants to see it, that you can't deny that this happened. Look, the tattoo was my name. They took away my humanity, and they gave me a number, like an animal. And yet that gave me power, because that's the proof, that I'm not making up the story. I'm just, I didn't decide one day to just, maybe I'll tell a story about something like that. I'm grateful that I didn't take it off, and I'm grateful that I can share it. It's very important. And it's very interesting. I feel it. I know it's not possible. I feel it psychologically.
Well, Tova, you talked about the tattoo being your witness, but you are a witness for all of us. And it's just such a pleasure to speak with you today and to hear your story. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you.
Elizabeth says, as painful as this is our world's shared history. The stories of those who lived through this time need to be shared. We agree, Elizabeth, and that's critical to the mission of the Holocaust Memorial Museum. It can be difficult to grasp the enormity of 6 million Jewish lives lost during the Holocaust. While Tova reminds us of the human toll of the Holocaust, she also gives us a reason to hope. And she's counting on all of us to share her story and to remember those who cannot speak for themselves. Thanks for joining us today as we mark International Holocaust Remembrance Day.